Thanks for listening to the For the Campus podcast, where each week we sit down and have discussions about Christian faithfulness in the college campus. To learn more about City Church Tallahassee and our ministries, head to citychurchtallahassee.com.
All right. Hey, guys. Thanks for listening to the For the Campus podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with one of our senior student leaders, Pham, and we're going to be talking about relationships and how to be intentional. Kevin, could you just start by talking about how you came to know Christ and how you got connected to this church?
Yeah, for sure. My parents are not believers, but they sent me to a private Christian school in town just because they wanted me to have a private education. It was actually the same high school you went to, North Florida Christian, down the road. And it was a Christian school. They preached the gospel at a young age when I was in first grade, and I came to know the Lord then. But I don't think I started to take things seriously until about 5th or 6th grade, where a youth pastor reached out. The church was like connected with the school, kind of weird. But the youth pastor, Jesse Bryan, reached out to me and says, hey, I want you to come to this camp called Snowbird. And he said, I want you to be a part of this. I care about you. And I was like, I'm not a big camp guy. No, thank you. And he was like, I think this would really be good for you. And so I was like, this guy really cares about me. I'll give it a shot. Went to Snowbird as a 6th grader, built a relationship with that youth pastor, and came to like really realize what following Jesus means. And I started taking my faith seriously, started reading scripture seriously. And then towards the end of high school, you reached out to me. I think I remember when I was a senior, when you were the youth pastor here, asking me to come play some music with Ryan Whitfield or something like that. Yeah. Long time ago. And I came and I remembered my old youth pastor was leaving the church, and I was like, I just need something new as I'm going to college. So yeah, spent my senior year here. And then as you got rolled on to the college pastor, I've been here ever since.
Yeah. And one of the reasons I invited you to be on the podcast was because I've been able to really up close watch you. I've been your mentor in our student leadership program for 3 years, 2
Something
years.
Like that,
I think it's 3 years.
Yeah.
And I've been able to watch you kind of evolve. And you've really become this figure in our student ministry team. We have about 60 to 70 college students in it that is known for being intentional and trying to bring people together and trying to work across different friend groups. And I'd love for you just to talk about what are some ways that college students can try to really be intentional with other students when it comes to building relationships?
Yeah, I would say something that someone told me once, I think it might have even been Dean in a sermon, is to never eat meals alone. So if I'm eating meals outside like fast food, it's usually because I've been lazy and haven't like prepared ahead of time, or I'm hurried. And so usually if I'm eating out, I'll just think, man, I need to text someone and see if they're willing to spend like an hour, and we'll just eat and hang out, And usually I try to do it with actually someone that's not one of my close friends. Try to do someone from my city group, reach out to them and see, like just text a bunch of them and see like, hey, 5:30 dinner at Chipotle if anyone's interested. And usually like someone pop up, it's like, yeah, I have nothing to do, let's do it, And in those times, like good conversation happens, and I feel like those moments I've really grown from. So yeah, I would say never eat meals alone.
Yeah, there's a book called Never Eat Alone, and it's actually a secular book, but it reminded me of a talk that Dhati Lewis, who's a pastor at a church in Atlanta called Blueprint, and he does stuff with the North American Mission Board. He gave, when I was an intern in college with the North American Mission Board, he gave a talk called Discipleship as Intersection, Not Addition. And we talk about that a lot in student leadership.
Yeah.
Like, rather than feeling like you have to add all these types of activities so that you can hang out with people, it's more, and disciple them, it's more about taking the things that you already love and do and trying to be more intentional with them. Talk me through like how to be intentional with a meal. So let's say someone's listening to this podcast and they say, you know what, I'm going to be intentional with a meal. I'm going to text somebody. We're going to go to Chipotle or Chick-fil-A or wherever. Like, what are some things that they need to do in order to make the most of that time?
Yeah. So usually if I'm going with someone I don't know very well, I'll have the same questions. I'll eat with them, or we'll get our food, we'll order, we'll sit down, and I'll just be like, hey, man, like, where were you born? Where are you from? Are your parents believers? When did you become a Christian? Do you have siblings? All these things, And usually somewhere in the midst of that comes like a big story about how they came to know the Lord, or like one of their lowest moments in life or something like that. And then I'll just be like, man, that was really cool. And like from there on, like, there's like the walls are down, you know, and like they're always free to text me. We'll always remember that first meal together from there on. And so, yeah, always come in with questions and then just genuinely like wanting to know more about that person. I'm not trying to talk a lot during those meals, you know, like I want to get to know this person. Yeah.
So do you make an intentional effort to try to work across different friend groups too? Because that's something I've noticed with you, is that you're kind of a bridge a lot of times between, you know, just naturally people are going to find people that they're close to. And I don't think there's anything inevitably wrong with having close friendships. But within student leadership, you know, we are trying to work together and get to know each other. And I've noticed that it seems like you do things to try to pull people from different pockets together. Is that true? And what does that look like?
I appreciate you saying that. That's very kind. Yeah, I would say I do try to. I want to love everyone well, right? Like, and so with that, I think I want to have a connection with anyone I could meet or talk to. So that being said, like if someone's into sports, I want to have a little bit of knowledge of what's going on in the world of sports, right? Or if someone's really into music, like I'm really into music, so that's easy. If someone's into working out, like I also have an avenue to talk about working out. If someone's into board games, then it's like, yeah, I also play Catan, you know? So I want to be well-knowledge in all these areas so I can talk to like the kid that comes into CCU, right, and doesn't know anyone. I want to be able to connect with them on some level of anything. So, yeah, because I do want to care for people well, especially the first-time guest that comes into our church, right? So I want to love and care for them well.
Was there a moment or a time where that clicked for you and the light bulb kind of came on and you really wanted to turn up the knob on intentionality with other people?
I would say yes, because I think back to Ryan Whitfield, probably one of the first people I met at City Church. I also think of Sam Whittick, you know, and those people were very intentional towards me, and they were really good towards me, gave me their time, and like people talk about those people that walk into the room and it's like a little easier to breathe, you know, and Sam Whittick was that for me. And so like after every meal with him, because we used to hang out a lot, I'd be like, man, that was such a refreshing time, a good time. And I remember those times when I was like freshman, you know, and I'm like, man, I want to give that to others. Like I want to be that for other people, that when I'm around them, they're like, they don't tense up, but they're like, it's easier to breathe. It's like an easier way to talk, you know, so.
And I mentioned that last week on the leadership podcast, or 2 weeks ago on the leadership podcast, where there's types of people who walk in the room and they say, here I am. And then there's types of people who walk in the room and say, there you are. And I do remember, you know, Sam being really intentional. What were some things that Sam and Ryan did in your life that made you feel that way?
For sure. So Ryan McRoy was actually my first city group leader. It was after I graduated my senior year of high school that summer. He texted me out of the blue. I remember him being like, hey, I lead the city group. Would you want to come? And like during the summer after my senior year, I was doing nothing, you know? So I was like, yeah, for sure. I came, and I don't remember what we talked about or anything like that, but I remember I kept going through my freshman year to his house. And he would always invite me over to play Catan.
Which is a board game.
Which is a board game, yeah, for those who don't know. A really nerdy one. But yeah, he would always invite me over to play Catan or watch movies or anything, you know, and he was always, like, his door was always open to me. And then Sam lived with Ryan, and Sam also played in the band, and I played in the band. So whenever I had music questions, he would just be like, oh, come on over, and, like, we'll play. Like, we'll walk through that part. So they were very giving of their time to me, and, like, looking back now, I also want to be giving of my time to others, right? I want to be generous with my time. And I know, like, not everyone has the time to give, but Dean talked about it yesterday in the sermon or whatever you would call what we do on Sundays now, but he says it's not the sum, it's the portion, right? And so I think of John Hoke, who, like, is a personal trainer, wakes up early, you know, on many days of the week.
He's one of our junior student leaders currently.
He's married, is working towards a pre-PT degree, but he's still a faithful student leader in our church. You know, he makes time for me, you know, like a good friend, to come over for dinner sometimes with him and Lily. And so I think, like everyone has time to give, you know, even the busiest of us.
Yeah, and I remember earlier this year I was preaching on the parable of the talents and was talking about how a talent is really anything that the Lord gives you that you can use for His kingdom. And I think a lot of times college students think, well, you know, I'm not super influential. I don't have a ton of money. I'm not super, honed in on a certain skill or craft yet. So they kind of slide by and get lazy or act like they're a kid at the kids' table.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we try to do in the student ministry is say, no, like use what the Lord's given you now
Right.
to do the best that you can now.
Yeah.
And, and don't make excuses. And as
Yeah.
things change in your life, it's probably actually going to get harder. And one of the things we really do try to encourage the college students to do is, like, if you have a car, that's a talent. 'Cause
Yeah.
That's a car that you could,
Or a place to live,
yeah,
right?
or a place to live. Like Brandon Boone, who just graduated, he's one of our senior student leaders.
Taco parties. Yeah.
And he got really good at throwing taco parties. And the thing about it is that Brandon is not a super outgoing guy. Like,
Right.
you would never think, if you were just met him and, he's going to be laid back. He's not going to talk a ton, but yet he says, okay, I have a kitchen, I have couches.
Yeah.
Let's get together and try to create this environment.
sure.
We've seen people get connected to the ministry through that.
Yeah. And I would even say, like, he does not have a big living space at all.
Mm-hmm.
Probably one of the smaller living spaces out of the friends that I know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember going to those things, showing up a little late and being like, there's 40 people. Like, how are you fitting this many people in this small room? And it's like, not everyone has a seat, but everyone can sit on the ground.
Yeah.
Everyone has food to eat, and everyone's going to have fun because we're going to play some kind of game,
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
And he doesn't have tons of money, but
Yeah.
he's taking what he does have and he's trying to use it
Yeah.
to create and foster community. What are some other creative ways that you've seen college students or you yourself have tried to create just some opportunities for people to have community, especially too with lost people? We're trying to just introduce them to people in the church before, necessarily trying to get them in certain environments.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually lived at home for the first 3 years of college. My parents were gracious enough to let me live there, and then they were gracious enough to let me move out and pay for my rent for a house. So I've been living with two guys who are really easygoing. So when winter came around, I love bonfires, and so made sure it was okay with them and tried to throw bonfires like pretty often, to be honest, on Fridays or Saturday nights, and just really invite like whoever, So that's one way. And then since we had a big backyard closest to the stadium on game days, we threw tailgates and try to really just text that student leader group chat that we have. And it's like, hey guys, tailgate at our place. We'll start around this time. Like, bring whoever, bring some food. Like, we'll have a good time. It's just trying to use like what the Lord's given us. I think Paul Sabino said it once when he came and preached here. Another church planner. He said, you have been blessed so you can bless others. I think Dean even said that on Sundays. And so I try to remember that, like, man, I'm given a lot and I want to use it well for God's glory and to love others well.
What are some ways that you've seen younger student leaders who are maybe still kind of getting their footing, or maybe more introverted people outside of doing these big kind of taco parties, bonfire? What does that look like to try to be intentional?
Yeah, I don't know if you met me during the stage, but I was a pretty shy guy at some point. I don't remember when. I feel like I'm extroverted now, but I don't remember when that happened. But I think I would say to those younger student leaders or younger folks who are a little bit more to themselves, I'd say, like, sometimes you have to learn to be the initiator. Like, you can't wait for people to come to you all the times. I've been working out with Hank, our resident, a lot, and we tell each other a lot this quote. It's kind of funny, but somewhat applicable in this situation. Don't wish for it, work for it. You know? So I don't want to wish that I'm part of a friend group, or I don't want to wish that guy was my friend. I want to work for it, right? And so I would say to those who are shy, like, you're going to have to, work towards these things, and you might have to be the initiator. And I would also say, like, going back to the meal thing, like, that's an easy way, just asking people out to grab some food. Like, you have to eat. And so, yeah, making good use of those times.
Yeah, and it's funny, it kind of ties to something that they teach in premarital counseling here, which is, like, if both people assume that they're the problem and they're working at it, like, the problem's going to be resolved. But if both people are pointing fingers and saying, you're the problem, you need to work on it, you go work on it, then it's never going to happen. Right. And I think that to tie that into what we're talking about, and we really try to encourage our student leaders to live this out, is we want to work as hard as we can to create community, to create events for people to get connected, to try to find all different types of ways, whether it's a bonfire, to pick up basketball, to taco nights, to et cetera, fill in the blank, for people to get connected. And we're going to work as hard as we can on our end, but people do need to still initiate and put in the effort and work hard too. Like, there has to be a mutual connection, a mutual desire for connection. And so that's something that I definitely see our older student leaders too trying to pass down to the younger student leaders. And you were talking about when you were shy. I definitely noticed for you when you became more intentional was when you got around Ryan McRoy, who at the time was really leveraging the season of life he was in to have a lot of people over. And
that's a good point, because he was single at the time, had a pretty big backyard, big house, and wasn't doing a crazy amount. He was working for the church, and so that's a good point that you make, like using his time of singleness really well. Now he's engaged and doesn't have as much time, but I agree.
And intentionality is something that, you'll get more and more intentional, and no matter what the season of life is, you can find ways to bring people into that and disciple them. And we've seen a lot of success from that. I would love for you too, just to share, one of the things that you said is I want to show people that I love them, I care for them, I want to welcome people in. What are some tips on how students can be hospitable when they are at a meal or hosting an event or leading a city group?
I would say, regarding when people walk into a city church for the first time, usually for our service, I don't get a lot of lobby time. Like I don't get to hang out a lot before because I'm playing the band. But when I'm not, I try to remember, don't hang out with your best friends. You'll see them later this week at some point, and try to make it a point to go talk to someone that, frankly, just doesn't know what's going on. They're just kind of lost. And someone told me this once, and I think that might have helped me become a little bit more extroverted. They say you go be awkward so they don't have to be, right? Like it's awkward for them to be like, hey, I'm here for the first time, can I come hang out with you? All these things.
Staring at their phone off to the side.
By themselves. And so someone told me, as an inviting person or a hospitable community, we want to be the awkward ones so that they don't have to be, and to draw them in. So that's one thing.
Yeah, and one of the things I found in life that's helped me is to put myself in environments where I'm the new person or I don't know the drill. And so whether that's, a few years ago, I thought it would be fun to train jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And I remember just walking in there and not knowing anyone and not knowing all the different little things that the people did, when to stand, when to sit. It was actually very, kind of parallel to church in a lot of ways. And it's and just kind of sitting there stretching and not knowing who to talk to and all of that. And it made me remember what it's like for people to come to church and the courage it takes. For us, it's we're going to church and we're seeing people we know and love and friends. And for them, they got in their car and they didn't know what to expect. And they got there early and they're embarrassed and or maybe they don't know when to sit, when to stand, how long's the service going to last? All those types of things. And I think that if you put yourself in environments where you're new, you started training CrossFit a couple years ago.
Yeah, for my freshman year.
Yeah. And you were the new guy.
Oh, yeah.
And you remember what it's like.
I do, yeah. And people came along and they asked me hey, do you need help with these, with some movements? And it meant a lot.
So I do think that that's a helpful thing is, think about a time when you were new to something and that'll help you have empathy. Or if you haven't been new to something in a long time, get outside your box and put what we would call outside eyes on.
Right.
What is it like to walk up to this group? And what other things do you think that students can do for hospitality or care? Yeah,
I would say as a part of leading small groups, someone once told me, I feel like I'm saying a lot of one-liners now, but I feel like you also say those, and I might have picked up on that at some point over the years.
One-liners are cool, man.
One-liners are cool, I suppose. So someone said vulnerability produces vulnerability regarding small groups, and so every small group or city group I've been able to lead the past 2 years, the first night we get together, I always open up hey guys, if you know the Lord, I want to hear how you came to know the Lord in a short 3-minute thing, because there's so many people those first nights. And if you don't know the Lord, that's fine. Just come and listen,
Yeah.
But I'll be I'll start off, and I'll straight up say some of the lowest points in my life, some of the things that I struggle with, and things I'm ashamed of, and all these things. And these kids are oh my gosh, I can't believe he said some of these things. And so I start off just being I'm not ashamed, the Lord has saved me from these things. That's not who I am now. But odds are these guys are still growing and they're still struggling with some things. And so, trying to be vulnerable that first night. And then you go around and these kids slowly open up on the first night when they don't know each other. So I would say, vulnerability produces vulnerability. That's something that's really helped me. to foster a good start to city groups. Instead of taking like 4 weeks to like finally get like accustomed to like seeing these faces and being comfortable, it's like we can just be comfortable off the bat, you know?
Yeah. And that circles back to intentionality too. You could do that with even lunches. Like I found when I'm vulnerable with people,
during
you know, those
meals.
because it's so easy just to talk about surface level things. And so you finally invite somebody from class to a meal and you're sitting down and you're talking to them and then you're just talking about sports the whole time or the newest movie the whole time. And there's nothing wrong with doing that a little bit, but then that lunch with you is no different than a lunch with an unbeliever.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
I think that part of being hospitable too is kind of modeling that vulnerability and saying, let's talk about like how's things going? What's it like being new in the city? Or, you know, are you struggling with PT school or, you know, those types of things, trying to open up.
Yeah. And I think something that's also helped starting off for our small group. So like some people do weird icebreakers, right? Like I've heard weird like start to city groups, but I like the normal, like what's the best part of your week and what's the worst part of your week. And that way you get to know this guy's like the best part and his worst part, you know, and you get to know him better instead of some odd story, which those are fun sometimes. But yeah, and usually that first week too is really like a lot of freshmen are coming in. So to ask them like, what's the best part of college so far and what's the worst part, really gets them open early.
Yeah. Was there somebody who was first like vulnerable with you that modeled that? Or?
I think of Todd Doss when he came to our city group. I don't think he was the first one, but I remember I invited him to come to our guys city group, talk about some stuff, and like he would just tell us like straight up things, you know, stuff that like you're like, oh man, I did not expect him to say these things. Like
Todd's our worship
pastor
here,
and so he would just talk about his marriage and some of like the best parts and the worst parts, you know, just being real and honest. And so those like intricate stories, I'm just like, man, those are very helpful and real stories, you know, they're not vague. So I think of Todd for that.
So one of the things that I've noticed that can really prohibit building relationships with people is our cell phones. And I looked back probably about this would have been 4 or 5 years ago. I was at summer camp and, you know, I was kind of multitasking and somebody was talking to me and I was on my phone doing something. And if you were to say, hey, what did I say? I'd be able to tell you what you said. And a friend of mine, Taylor Langston, who me and him grew up in high school together and served together for a long time before he moved away. He came up to me and was like, hey man, when you are on your phone and people are talking to you, even if you're listening to them, it seems like you don't really care what they're saying. So even if you can tell them what they said, it seems like you don't really care what they said. That's the issue, right? And that really stuck with me. I tried to make a behavior change right there. What are some other things that you feel like are bad, you know, taboo or negative things to do when it comes to building relationships and being hospitable?
Yeah, the first thing I think about is going into lunches or small groups and talking too much maybe. I think I've been guilty of that times where I'm just blabbering and I'm like, oh man, I don't know anything about this guy, you know? Or I think everyone's been in that small group where there's that one guy that's talking too much and everyone else is like, I just don't even want to be here at this point, you know? Like this guy's been talking for 20 minutes. So remembering to genuinely care about the other person, to get to know them and not talk about yourself too much. And then I think with your phone, like maybe a little off topic, but like being on Instagram too much, I don't know what the stats are now, but I know for me, like there was a season where I was on my phone way too much, you know? And something, I don't know what clicked. Maybe I was reading a book recently, but now like I don't have Instagram on my phone. I haven't looked at Snapchat in years. And so I'll look at Instagram for maybe 20 minutes at night, you know, like while eating dinner. And that's like my only time. I'll get on my computer and just scroll through and see what's happening. And then in reality, it's like a lot of these things happening on Instagram, I really don't care about, you know, because if those people are close to me, I'll text them and then I'll already have known what's going on. So, just getting off of Instagram, and like I think Hannah talked about it during the podcast where she was on, but having like these comparison issues with other people and seeing maybe relationships that look like they're the most perfect thing in the world, where in reality, like behind the scenes, it's not, you know? So yeah, I think going back to your phone thing, like I think my generation is on our phone too much. So yeah.
And I think that, you know, if it pulls you away from the people you love or or the things that you need to do, it's a really big issue. Or if it makes you less satisfied with what the Lord has given you, that's an issue. And it's funny because I've realized that a lot of students would rather pretend like they have these relationships or this lifestyle than to actually pursue those relationships.
Yeah.
Like, if
it's
you
easier
had
to be on Instagram.
If you wanted to have great friends with a low Instagram or a high Instagram with all fake friends, a lot of students unfortunately would rather appear to have that than actually have it. And that's really sad.
It is sad.
Because you can still have great relationships without having friends on social media. And, people use it for different things. But, my wife, like, she just realized that she had told herself for a long time, well, people need to see photos of our kids, and, people might need to contact me or reach out to me, or all these things that we tell ourselves to try to justify staying on when we don't want to. And then my wife eventually realized, like, I can text photos or share iCloud links, photo links. And
there's a better way to do these things.
Yeah, there's a better way. And for her, it just, like, for me, I like being on there because I like looking at photographs from different, like, nature photographers, and I like seeing what people are doing. I don't find it pulling me away from the people I'm with, and I don't find it making me less content. But everybody's different. You got to respond appropriately to yourself. One of the things I also know that you're really good at is, so I've been your official, quote unquote, official mentor through student leadership for about 3 years, where you're assigned a student leader mentor, and we have somewhat biweekly, depending on the season of life groups.
Really? Depending,
And but you also go above and beyond to try to find other people in this church to mentor you, whether it's on finance or music, relationships, whatever it may be. Could you talk about finding mentors in the church and how you try to make the most of that, and then how you try to turn around and mentor others?
Yeah, I would say I'm 22 years old now, and I do not know enough about life. Like, there's a lot more to life out there. I don't know if I consider myself a man yet, but I'm wanting to be a godly man. So I need help, and so I also don't know how to work finances super well right now. And so I think of Robert Coleman, who runs our finances at the church. I remember hearing about him, and I'm like, man, I don't know how old he is, 75. But I was like, man, I think he probably knows a lot about finance, and I would love to learn that right now so that I don't make dumb mistakes growing up. And so just learning to, like, get out of your comfort zone and, like I said, be the initiator, and just going up to him and be like, hey, Mr. Robert, I'm Kevin. Hunter told me about you. I know you run finances here, and I would love to sit down with you over a meal and just hear about how to manage my finances better as I grow up, as I get a job. And he loves it, and I've come to realize that, like, not only him, but so many other older people in this church love interacting with like younger people, because they're Christians and they don't want to hoard, like, their knowledge to themselves, So yeah, I think of Robert, and he's been so good to me. He'll even be like, yo, we haven't hung out in a while, like, let's grab coffee, So I think of him, and I think of really half the staff of the church, like Matt Crawford and Joe, and then Brian, who's not on staff but is very knowledgeable about Scripture, are always willing to listen to my questions and to answer them, because I can't do it alone, And so these guys, I think the Lord's given us a local church for that reason, right? Like, I only get to talk to them because I'm a part of this ministry, and I'm grateful for that. And so I try to reach out to those guys and to learn a lot from them.
And I know that they'll come to me and say, hey, Kevin, he knew what he wanted to talk about, like, generically, oh, I want to learn from you about this thing, or you would come with questions, which is good.
I try to be mindful of
try
questions.
To respect their time. And then also, like, something I've learned is, like, a lot of people want mentors, but they don't really know exactly what they want. And then a lot of people want mentors, and it's like, I want you to meet with me 2 hours every week, versus, like, saying, hey, like, a couple of times throughout this year, like, let's sit down and talk life and talk about finance, and having multiple mentors. I think you've done a good job of that, and we hope that student leaders will. We try to structure one in our student leadership program, but, like, I know that people in this church, exactly like what you said, they really do want to,
like, pour into them. And I know a lot of students are probably looking for mentors, but they're afraid to ask. And I think you told me this once, but it's like, if you're not willing to ask, you probably just don't want it enough, So like, it is intimidating to go up to these guys maybe and ask if they'd sit down for an hour, for a meal, but like these are life lessons that you need to learn, and it's better to ask these guys and hear what they've gone through than try to figure out yourself.
And how have you tried to mentor younger students in our church? Like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think I try to be generous with my time. And so something that there is a moment that I remember that might have flipped the switch for me to be more hospitable. But my second city group I was a part of was Mike and Mike, my sophomore year. These two guys, they were both named Mike. And I don't remember the specifics of what we talked about in that group, but they would always end group with, if you need to talk about something or if you just need a friend this week, call us up. We'll grab a meal with you. First meal is always on us, And so, those guys are really intentional, and they loved and cared for me well. And so I remember that, and I want to do that for others. So if someone's calling me up and asking for a meal, like I try never to say no. And I think you've done this well. I'm studying civil engineering. There were busy times in life. So instead of saying no, it's like, hey, I can't at this time or this day, but can you do it this time, or this time? Instead of, set up options so they're not just like left in the dust. So I'm not just saying, hey, I can't. They're like, oh, okay, well, he must not want to, Yeah. But setting up specific times. Yeah.
Are you ready for some rapid fire questions?
Oh, man. I'm not. I have 2 questions to ask you at the end of it.
All right.
Like Hannah did.
Well, let's do the rapid fire questions first. You go ahead and do mine if they're serious.
Yeah, they are. They're kind of serious.
All right, let's stay serious.
I just have 2. What are some things you're able to enjoy during this time, during quarantine, that you weren't able to during the normal flows of CCU when we were full swing?
So I was talking with Hank and Amanda, who are both on our college staff, and I feel like I've gotten to know certain people better than I would have if we were just in normal. Spring, there's just a level of we're doing check-ins and FaceTimes with people, and just kind of those types of, we've kind of tried to kick it into drive and really check in on people. And we moved our student leader meetings to weekly, and we broke our student leaders into different grade groups, and we've done some things that have allowed me to meet people within our own church that I've loved and cared about and known to some level, but I feel like I've got to know some of them better. And then on a family front, I've got a lot of good time with my family, good conversations, and I found it in a lot of ways to be more challenging for me spiritually, to be honest.
Okay.
Because I'm just out of certain rhythms that help me.
Right.
Remember in those Sonic video games where he'd hit the little treadmill thing and it would shoot him off and boost him up or whatever? Like in my day, there would be things like that I took for granted. Like I'd show up to work and I'd be getting a cup of coffee, and then Joe Thigpen, our discipleship pastor, would come up and he'd share something with me, and boom, it would help me. And then now everybody's a little more disconnected, and we've lost a lot of those regular rhythms and interactions that help. So I've found the spiritual side to actually be more challenging, which is probably good. But I found, I've got to know my own family better, and I've got to know, other student leaders a little bit better.
Yeah, for sure. And then my second question and last question, you've been college pastor for 3 years-ish now. What's your favorite CCU memory that you've had, or your favorite season maybe?
That's a tough one. I think for me, my favorite memory was the first time we ever did launch at Langford.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
I came in the spring, and we started doing monthly meetings, and I started to meet students. And then we started to build a student leadership team. And every year student leadership has improved, and we've done a better job on every front of that.
Yeah,
but,
for sure.
I started to try to find student leaders that I thought would be great. And I sat down with one of our seniors at the time, or actually he was a junior, Andrew Karp, had breakfast with him, and he just really encouraged me. And he was like, I feel like, the Lord has been so gracious and generous to me in salvation. I want to turn around and be gracious and generous to students in our church.
That's cool.
And
Yeah.
whatever you feel like we need to do, I'm going to be fully on board. I'm going to be your number one cheerleader. And he's been that. And he even lived with me for a season
I remember that.
Of life when he was a little bit older and he was in the minor league baseball team. He'd come back here and live with me in the off season. And so we were kind of gearing up, and I was starting to meet students. And the first, I would say, official thing we really tried to do was launch at Langford.
Yeah.
And I remember, just so much work and uncertainty, and we put out 400 chairs, and we created graphics, and we tried to explain, like, this is our first year of really City Church U as we know it today, And I remember, just being so nervous that, like, I remember in my head, I was just like, man, even if there's like half the people there, like, at least like, just being really scared, And then I remember that night, like, we didn't have enough chairs.
Right. I remember. I think I stood in the back.
And we had over 400 people at our first ever one, and our students were just so faithful to go out and pass out flyers and invite their friends.
Yeah.
And to me, like, I was standing back there with my wife, and I actually have a photo of this in my house of the first ever one. It's just me and her standing at the event. Cool. And I remember tearing up and just being like, the Lord is so good, and these students work so hard. Like, it felt like a victory for our church, because it wasn't because most people didn't even know, like, what Lunch at Langford was. They're like, what is that? Like a job fair or something, know? And but just really for the first time, just seeing this huge team of students go all in for reaching their friends.
That's cool.
It's my favorite one.
That's a cool memory. Yeah.
All right. Rapid fire with Kevin. What is the hardest CrossFit lift?
Oh, man. For me,
overhead squats.
I would say for me, deadlifts. Yeah. Surprisingly enough, if you're taller, some people say they have a better deadlift because they have more of a hinge because they will have longer bodies. Interesting question. Interesting first question. I'm really bad
as
at
a taller guy.
handstand
I've
walks.
always felt like tall guys always pretend like shorter guys have better mobility and squatting.
Tall
and
guys say
deadlifting
that
and
a
stuff.
lot about
But
weightlifting.
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay. What is the most impactful book that you've read as a college student?
Oh, man. A while ago, I would have said What's Best Next. That's talking about efficiency and your time management. And it's a Christian book and talks about how if you're efficient with your work, you can serve others well and you have more time to do whatever you want. So that one. But recently, Brian Seagraves recommended a book called Digital Minimalism, talking about how our phones have almost taken over our lives and we need to use it as a tool instead of using it as entertainment. Digital Minimalism, I'd say for right now, by Cal Newman. Not a Christian book, but very helpful.
Yeah, and we talked about Cal Newman when I was interviewing Ashlyn.
Yeah.
He might be a believer. It's not a Christian book, but I think Cal Newman might be a believer.
Yeah.
I think I heard an interview one time. I read that book also and thought it was really good.
Yeah, he writes great stuff.
Yeah.
Oh,
really.
Just Do Something by Kevin DeYoung is also really good with decision making. Anything Kevin DeYoung writes, to be honest, for the most part, I've always enjoyed and learned a lot from.
What was the most helpful piece of student leadership for your spiritual development?
Honestly, I would say our mentor group, and then just to publicly encourage you here and let everyone know, like, there are times where I was going through something, and I was like, man, I don't know who to talk to. I'd call you up and be like, hey, dude, I need to talk whenever you get a chance. And you'd be like, dude, come swing by my house this morning, And I would come, and Azaria's running around, and Hannah's, like, making smoothies or whatever, and, like, you would sit there and talk to me. So I'm really grateful for that. But I would also say, like, that's because both you and I have put in the work for our friendship, relationship, whatever, after, like, 4.5 years, 5 years, so it didn't come within a week, but it's like we put work in towards a good friendship, good mentorship. And so I'd say that's one of the most helpful things about student leadership. Yeah.
And I had to kind of convince you to be a student leader.
Yeah, I remember that. Must be a little punk.
No, well, it was a funny.
It?
Yeah, well, you were coming back from summer camp where you guys had great summer camps. Summer camps can be such a great incubator for spiritual growth for college students because you can go and get away from all the worldliness and really focus. And I remember the first year that we ever did student leadership, we didn't really have very much structure, and we had a lot of things. And you were worried about accountability. And I remember this was one of those fantastic moments that it's just like people don't
have to be embarrassed.
No. Here. People, you challenge people. I've seen you do this, and kind of I did it with you, and then I've seen you do it with others. But just being like, look, I know that this isn't perfect, but would you rather do nothing?
Yeah, I actually do remember that.
Then, is this so bad?
Yeah.
And I remember you, to your credit, you were like, that's a good point. Like, even though, because it's always funny when students are like, I remember I had a student leader sit down after the first year, and they're like, I really think that you should interview personally every single student leader. And I was like, I agree with you. And then they were like, what? And it was like, we're going to try to do that next year, but I just couldn't work it in, or,
Because I don't have the time
yeah,
for that.
Sometimes it's like people, it takes a lot of courage to share feedback. And then I'm like, I agree. And then they're like, oh, it's like, I just don't have this magic wand to always make everything perfect, but
Yeah. And I think that conversation probably helped me out also, because I think he said, are you going to be a part of this, or are you going to like just not be? And I was like, oh crap, like, am I just going to complain and like talk about this, or am I just going to go and like help put work in and hopefully build this thing to something? So
Well, I appreciate you for how you have stepped up and helped build this college student leadership team, and thanks for just giving us this time to talk about hospitality and intentionality and mentorship and relationships. That's really what we wanted to talk about. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks again for listening to the For the Campus podcast. If this podcast was helpful for you, please take time to share it with others. Also, feel free to reach out to us online. Have a great day.